Hey everybody, welcome to Fit Tip Tuesday and welcome to part 3 of my pants fitting troubleshooting series. I just want to remind everybody the series is focusing on things that I'm noticing that my students are having trouble with, or things that are taking them a long time to wrap their head around, or just things that really need reminders. And today what I'm going to be tackling is how to make a final prep of your pattern pieces, cut them out to make a fit muslin. So let's take a look here. I shared how to prep the pattern last week, and we ended up with these two very colorful pattern pieces. I'm going to put them away. I made a neat copy. And I want to work with a small sort of mini scale here, just so it's easy for you to see everything that I'm doing. And if I were working with life-size pattern pieces and fabric, it would be hard for you to see all the details. So that's why I'm using these little pattern pieces. And the first thing I want to talk about here is after you've done all your prep, okay, so you've added your fitting allowances above the waist and along the side seam, and then also you might have added them to your inseam if you felt you needed that based on, you know, an athletic front thigh or prominent inner thighs or inward rotating knees. Those are all reasons why I would add an extra safety seam allowance to the inseam. And then you've extended your darts up through the additional allowance above the waist. That's very important. Okay, so the original dart is literally this area in here from the waistline down. This is the original dart here. What I did was I extended the dart legs up to the top of the waistline into the part that we added for fitting. So these pattern pieces are really ready to go. There's one other issue that I want to talk about really quickly here. In order for you to see what you're doing when you start fitting your pants, the hem of the pant leg cannot be touching your foot. Ideally, you want it to hover somewhere around your ankle, because that's going to be your horizontal balance line. When you're looking at what's happening with your front and back leg as you're trying to balance it, you're going to be looking at the inseam and the hem to make sure those are hanging straight and that the hem is parallel to the floor. If your hem is wrapped around your foot or dragging on the floor, you're not going to be able to see that. So the easiest thing that I have discovered to do to make sure your muslin is shorter than, or as short as you need it to be, is to simply take the hem and fold it up to the knee line. Okay, like this. Now if I do this on both of my pattern pieces, I know I've shortened each leg equally. Okay, because remember, they also have to match. So if you shorten one leg, you have to make sure you shorten the other leg in equal amount. Also, if you've taken time to create pattern pieces that are the right length for you, including your seam allowances, then folding them up allows you to get rid of the extra length you don't need on your fit muslin without needing to then readjust the pattern when you're ready to cut out your final pants out of fashion fabric. So you can see here, all I did was fold these up, and I'm literally just going to put a pin you know, in there to make sure they stay. Now, if your hem has flare, and when you fold it up, the hem is wider than the knee area, all you have to do is fold down the ends like this, where it's too wide. You don't want to cut into that. So see how I just basically folded this hem out of the way? So if it's not a straight leg or a tapered style, then just fold the flared little edges of the hem out of the way and pin those in place. That way you can put them right back down when you're ready and finalized, and you're ready to start sewing your actual pants pattern. All right, so I'm just going to stick a pin in there. Now my pants pattern pieces are ready to cut out, and we're going to use this fabric, and we're going to pretend that this is 60 wide fabric that I folded in half. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay my pattern pieces on. Now, a lot of times, and especially because we've added extra to the side seam, your pieces are probably not going to fit side by side like this. So sometimes what will happen is your layout will look more like something like this. So you can lay out your front and then nestle the crotch curve underneath the end of the front leg going down. You know, so you need to make sure you have enough fabric. But for this example, I can fit my pieces side by side like this, so that's what I'm going to do. And then I'm just going to use a few of my favorite little sew tights to pin those to the fabric. So I'm just going to use 2. Now you want to make sure that you are positioning your fabric on grain. So ideally, let me just draw this in here. I don't have the grain line. I would put the vertical grain line, I would draw it on your pattern. So let's pretend this has been here the whole time. Basically, you want to make sure that this grain line is parallel to the selvage edge. All right, so that's the purpose of having this grain line, is to make sure it's parallel. So you want to position your pieces on the fabric. Now let's just talk about fabric for a second. I have been making my Sorcia Classic Slim trousers out of a variety of fabrics, and I have chosen similar fabric to do my fitting with because that gives you the most reliable result. So when I worked on my linen Sorcia Classic Slim trousers, I used a lightweight loosely woven gauze to test the fit because it hung very similarly to the linen. And then when I worked on my tan cotton woven trousers, I made sure I used a more densely woven pants fabric to test that. So, you know, just make sure you're using something that's similar. It doesn't need to be exact, but you'll get closer results if you have a fabric that's similar. Now, if you don't have any pants fabric on hand and you want to use standard muslin, you totally can do that as well. Just keep in mind that muslin fabric like this doesn't drape and hang as nicely as garment fabric. So, you know, you can use muslin, but you may have to, you know, do some very fine tuning once you get it into your fashion fabric. All right, so you can see here I have my legs positioned onto my fabric, and I'm going to cut them out. Now you can cut any way that you like. I personally like to use a rotary cutter on my Big Mat from the Big Mat Rotary Cutting Surface Company. In my opinion, the best cutting mat on the market. If you're at all interested in checking out that mat, I do have a link to their Etsy site underneath in the description of this video. Also, you know, sew tights have become my essential new sewing notion of 2023 here, so I do have a link in the description below for sew tights as well. The cool thing about my sew tight link is it gives you 15% off. So it's an affiliate link, but it's kind of a win-win because, like I said, if you're looking at sew tights and you're going to get a bunch, 15% off is kind of nice. Okay, so now my pieces are cut out, and the next thing I want to do before I remove the pattern piece from my muslin is I want to just mark the darts. Now, this is a muslin. I'm not going to be wearing this, so I like to do the quickest, easiest thing to mark those darts, and what I find to be super easy is to take a Sharpie marker and just bleed into the tip of the darts. And this way I'm not moving the fabric. I mean, I'm not moving the pattern piece at all, so I know they're going to be accurate. So see, that gives me these little dots right here. Then I can just lift up the very edge of my waistline, and I can just dot in the top of those dart legs very accurately. Okay, now if I were working on my actual pants, I would not use a Sharpie marker to do this. I'd probably use chalk, and I would probably sink pins into the tips of the darts so I could see where they were, and then chalk in my dart lines. But for the muslin, which is what we're doing in this video, a Sharpie marker works really well because it bleeds right through, and then you don't have to fuss around with getting an accurate, accurately transferring those to your pattern pieces. And the cool thing is, if I turn this upside down immediately, I can see the dots on the opposite leg. I can go ahead and transfer those as well. And I can even see the tips of my darts here. So now I've transferred the tips of the darts and the top of the dart legs onto both the right and left back leg. Okay, unpin my pattern from my fabric, and I can draw my dart in now that I have the paper gone. So I'm just going to go ahead and, draw in my darts like this. Okay, and I might as well just do both sets of them while I have it together here. All right, so what I'm going to do now is, now that I've marked my darts on both my back leg pieces and I have my front leg pieces, I'm going to take one set of legs to work with now. I'm going to take my second set of legs and I'm going to put these away, because what we're going to do with our second set of legs is we are going to transfer all the adjustments that we make to our single leg muslin onto our pattern pieces, and then recut these legs before we sew them together and add them to our first leg later. So for now, we're going to be working with a single leg muslin. So take one set of legs and put them aside. So you just have your one set of legs to work with. So the next step is we're going to mark the original waistline and the stitching line on the side seam and inseam. That's the next step. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark the original waistline, and we just want to have this on here for a reference. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that. And you can measure your pattern piece or whatever you added to the top, just measure that same amount and just mark it on the tops of your muslin so it looks like this. So this represents the original waistline, front and back. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to mark our stitching lines. Now, the stitching lines are not the same thing as the allowances we added for fitting. What we added for fitting is room that we have to let out the side and inseams if we need to. When we sew up our muslin to start with, we don't want to add any of that extra allowance into the muslin, because remember, we did pick our size based on our full hip. So we don't know if we need any of the extra allowance we added. We just need it there in case we need to let it out. What we're going to do is we're going to make note of what we added to the side seam. In the instructions printed on my Sorsha Classic Slim trousers, I have you add 2 inches to the medium and larger sizes, and I have you add 1.5 inches to the smaller size 2 to 8 sizes. So whatever you added, you're going to add a 1/2 inch to that, because there's already a 1/2 inch seam allowance in the pattern, so it's included. Now here's the cool thing about this. We have a front and back leg. We only need to mark this stitching line on one of the legs because you can only see, you know, one layer of fabric when you're sewing. You put your layers together and you sew. You just need one stitching line. So you do not have to mark the stitching line on both the front and back legs. So just pick one. So I think because the front is looking kind of lonely here, I'm going to use the front to mark. And if I had a 2-inch allowance, I'm going to mark a 2.5-inch stitching line. Why are we physically marking the 2.5-inch stitching line on the muslin? Because it's really hard to keep track of that large of a seam allowance on your sewing machine as you stitch. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start at the bottom here, and I'm just going to dash in my 2-inch allowance like this. Okay, so I'm just going to go right up the entire length of, oops, right up the entire length of my muslin, like this. So this is the stitching line right here on my side seam. Side seam. And again, remember, we only have to mark it on one of the legs, so there it is. Now, if you added to your inseam, you're going to do the same thing. So on the inseam, if you added an inch safety seam allowance, you're going to mark your stitching line at 1.5 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and do that as well. And again, you just measure from the raw edge all the way up, like this. Okay, so there is my stitching line. This is my inseam stitching line. All right, so now if we look at these two pattern pieces, we can see that we are really ready to go. All right, so if you have any questions about how to cut out and prepare your muslin pieces to create a single leg muslin, please post those below and I will help you. Friday at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, I will be live and we will be working on my bias cut Sorsha Classic Slim shorts. I'm using my Japanese printed fabric for this, and I'm really having a fun time working with that. So join me to see the progress on that on Friday. And I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day.